All right. Hey, our fans, Pete here from the Lasser Cast. And you know what time it is? It's time for another author interview. Today, I have an author that I've been wanting to get on this channel for a very long time, Stephen Kozanowski. Stephen, welcome to the Lasser Cast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I have actually been a fan of Stephen's for a while. When I first got into horror, like really hardcore, um, I saw him on a panel at a virtual comic book convention during COVID, not comic book convention, horror convention. And since then, I have read Hematophages and I've also read Clickers Never Die. And so we're going to talk about both books today. So, Stephen, I had a question for you right off the bat. You did an interview for a website called Ginger Nuts of Horror.
hmm
And the very last question they asked you was, what is one question you wish that you got asked, but you never do? And that question was, are you related to Joseph Conrad? So I'm going to ask you that question.
um, I believe the answer is probably no,
Oh, okay.
but Conrad's his real name is Korzeniowski.
Oh, okay.
Um, and it is a family rumor that we are somehow related to him, but I think based on I know where the Korzeniowskis or whatever you want to say are from, which is Biała Podlaska in modern day Poland,
Okay.
and Conrad is from what would be modern day Ukraine,
Okay.
and I don't think we're probably related, but uh, we do have the same last name.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
I remember, and so here's a little plug too. On Steven's YouTube channel, he does a show called Publish Like a Motherfucker. And he had me on for the recent installment. And you mentioned before that um, if you had gotten an agent, they would have said to you, lose your last name and get a different last name. Do you find that having your last name has like kind of affected sales at all?
I think so.
Yeah.
I have. It's a shame because I have no real way to tell one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that there are people, I see it misspelled in a lot of reviews and stuff. So I can only assume that on occasion people are trying to find me and can't.
Yeah.
So that may be indirectly affecting sales. But yeah, I really, in some ways, I regret it. I had this conversation with my first publisher, and she said, "You wrote the book. If I had written a book, I would want my real name on it." So, and I was like, "Yeah, you're right." But now 10 years down the line, I'm like, have I shot myself in the foot? I could have gone with Conrad, or I could have done lots of things that would have made my life easier, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'll admit, like when you're trying to do an Amazon search, it kind of makes it complicated. You're like, wait a minute, is the I first or the E? But the thing is, I think that like if someone is really dedicated to finding you and finding your work, they're going to find it, you know. And so you have this presence, you know, on YouTube and on Twitter. And I think that like one thing that has always kind of drawn me to you is that you have like advice to give to aspiring writers, you know, and you know the publish like a motherfucker videos. I think those are like very helpful, very like basic stuff that every writer should know when they're starting out. So, um, another question that has nothing to do with anything that we just said
Oh,
is when I was looking up your bio, it said that you're the two-time winner for the World Horror Gross Out Contest. And
yes.
I was wondering, like, how does that a person win that award?
So what happened was in 2016, I went to the World Horror Convention in Provo, Utah,
Okay.
and it was sparsely attended because it was in Provo, Utah. But I got to meet Jack Ketchum there. I think, I got to meet Kevin J. Anderson there. There were a couple of big heavy hitters. It was a very exciting time, and I was young, young gun at this point, and they were having what had been a tradition, which was the World Horror Grossout Contest. And the way it works is you write a 5-minute story, and then it's sort of like the Gong Show, which your younger viewers are now googling what the hell the Gong Show is.
Right.
But hopefully you and I remember, and our age. they give you 3 minutes, and then they either gong you off or let you go and finish the story. So I worked on the first one, that 2016 one, like slavishly for months. I was like perfecting. I'm like, and I'm kind of now you said this, you've seen me do CoronaCon, that sort of thing. I'm a pretty good performer, which a lot of authors are not.
Mm.
I've been a public speaker, for ages, and I really blew them away. And I was shocked when they handed me the World Horror. I won the World Horror Gross Out contest. It's a silly thing. It's like they get judges, and then it's like, how is his haircut? How is his delivery? It's a very silly thing, but it's for fun. And
Yeah.
then World Horror shut down, and the Gross Out contest moved to KillerCon.
Oh, okay.
And then same thing in 2018. I went and I won. And then I realized after that point, you're supposed to retire after you've done 3. And
Oh,
I
okay.
kept doing it. I kept doing it. I kept doing it. And I kept losing. And I was like, oh, I'm not the young gun anymore. Like when I won the first 2 times, now I'm the old guy and nobody wants to vote for me. And so I feel like I'll be doing this for the rest of my life now. I'm
So is
John
KillerCon
Ringo. Yeah.
is KillerCon in Texas? Is it in Austin, Texas?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. And then when does that happen? Like what time of year?
August, the best time to
Yeah,
visit
right?
Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. To
Yeah.
burn your fucking balls off. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like are you gonna come to this year's con?
Yeah, I probably will. Because there used to be kind of a conflict with Scares That Cares, but now Scares That Cares only has an event in April.
Oh,
So I
okay.
should be free to do August. I guess it'll just depend on, again, whether I want to get on a flying death tube or not. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, and like you said, like, oh man, August in Austin is horrible. I live in Cedar Park, which is a suburb of Austin. So
oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will
But
tell you, if I
yeah,
can plug something,
please, yeah.
if all of your viewers go and vote for me, nominate me for a Splatterpunk Award, and I'm nominated for a Splatterpunk Award this year, that'll make me much more likely to go to KillerCon.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and it's still 2022, send an email to the Splatterpunk committee and recommend Clickers Never Die. And if I get nominated for something like that, I'll be much more likely to come down your way.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that'd be cool. I would definitely go if you're gonna be at KillerCon, so I would go to it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you mentioned Kevin J. Anderson
Mm,
before, and it's funny because one of my questions I wrote was how your first book, that your first novel, right, is Brain Eater Jones, right?
yeah.
And so Kevin J. Anderson has this series. It's called Dan Shambles Zombie
Yes.
PI.
Yes, it is.
So, like, do you have to go sue Kevin J. Anderson?
Did you already research this? Did you know the answer to this question?
I don't know the answer to this question. No, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, okay, that's a funny story.
yeah, yeah.
So I wrote Brain Eater Jones in 2009. I did not get it published until 2013. And I think the first Dan Shamble came out in maybe 2011.
Oh, okay.
I was not aware of it before it came out.
Yeah.
And when you're a little baby author, and this is one of the things I think I talk about, like you mentioned before, I like to give advice and that kind of thing. And there's stupid shit that people get. Are we allowed to swear?
Please.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. There's stupid shit that young authors get obsessed with. To be fair, there's other stupid shit that old authors get obsessed with, but they're very different things.
Yeah.
And if you're obsessed with somebody stealing your idea, that's how I know you're a brand new neophyte. You don't know shit, because you know what, dude? No one is stealing your idea. Honest to God,
Right.
like nobody was sitting there going, "Oh yeah, I gotta take the undead detective." No, that nobody ever put those two things together. Obviously,
Right.
two people on different sides of the world did. So I was all hepped up. I was like, that motherfucker. I wrote this in 2009. He didn't get it out until 2011. I'm the real original. I was so angry. Um, and then, I thought about it, and maybe I matured a little bit by the time I went to World Horror. And I was like, you know what I should do? I should go introduce myself to KJA, say I admire his work. I've been reading him since high school. And hey, man, here's a copy of Brain Eater Jones. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's very much like your series. And I just, wanted to be kind of a courteous guy.
Yeah.
And I flew out there to Provo. I did the thing. I was like seething a little bit inside because I was like, "Oh, I hate him. He stole my idea." And I handed him the book, and he was like, "I have heard of this." And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "And you know why?" And he's like, "Because I had somebody accuse me of stealing their idea." And I was like, "Okay." So Kevin J. Anderson is also a publisher. So
Mhm.
when you're a publisher, you get a lot of what they call slush. Like
Right.
people say, "Hey, do you want to publish this? Do you want to publish this?" And he said, "Somebody sent to my publishing company an idea about a skeleton detective." Now, I don't personally read the slush, so at some point, somebody in KJ Anderson's publishing company rejected this idea for skeleton detective. Then Dan Shamble came out. Then that guy got really pissy and went on a crusade and said, Kevin J. Anderson stole my idea. And he said, seeing Brain Eater Jones and seeing you not be an ass about it made me feel so much better because I said, look, people can have the same idea at similar times and
Right.
not all be dicks to each other about it. So I was like, I'm so glad I had that conversation. Um, I'm a little ashamed. Like I'm not gonna lie in front and be like, oh yeah, I knew better the whole time. I
Right.
was a young and petty little person, but I'm
Right.
so glad I had that interaction because I learned about that.
That is awesome. Yeah. Yeah. He seems like he'd be a cool guy. And Kevin J. Anderson also does seminars where he gives writing advice to
Yes.
aspiring writers as well. And I've watched one of them too. It's pretty helpful. Um, People who might not know him, he writes a whole bunch of science fiction books, but he also has written like Dune prequels and stuff with Frank Herbert's
Yep.
son, Brian Herbert. I figured that could be a good transition into the first book of yours that I read. The hematophages. And the thing about the hematophages that was very appealing to me when I was first getting into reading horror literature is that it's science fiction, you know? And what I was worried about before I read it was, is it going to be like basically horror, but you just kind of sprinkle sci-fi trappings on it to make it sci-fi? But I felt like it was the exact opposite. I thought there was really great world building in it.
Okay.
And so what I was going to say to you, my first question for hematophages is, um, with that world building, there's some really great aspects to it. I don't want to spoil the book because I want people to read it, but like one part that was very intriguing to me was that like the ship itself is like a flying office in space, and you
Yes.
took that corporate culture from like Alien and just like times it by 100. And besides that, there's also an all-female crew, and all the people have essentially like become, like you say, Brazilian in the book, like where everyone is one skin tone. And
Yeah.
so I was wondering, as a guy who's now written science fiction and horror, when you're world building, what percentage is kind of like what you speculate the future is going to be like, and what percentage of that world building is, oh, I need to make this work into my story?
That's an interesting question. Um, and some of the stuff I find that with science fiction in particular, and maybe less so in fantasy because fantasy is kind of a different animal. But with my science fiction, I like to take trends. I sort of act like a politician. You know how every politician, every time some vote about a stop sign being put in is passed, it's the worst thing or the greatest thing that's ever happened. Like it's like these really extreme assumptions about what can tend to be innocuous things.
Mhm.
So I like to do that. And so, like you said, with the corporate culture, um, I looked at, I work a day job and I work a white collar job, and I have to deal with the unions and deal with the reasonable accommodations and this and that. And so I said, what will that be like in 200 or 300 years? At what point does it sort of circle back around and it's like the company store and you owe your soul to the company, or the company essentially owns you, you're an employee, you're no longer a citizen, and some of that stuff, and like the healthcare stuff. There's a great through line with the hematophages about healthcare is just simply unobtainable, because although the technology is there, it's so expensive. It's prohibitively expensive to basically anyone.
Right.
And that's just how I see healthcare working. Like everyone's like, "Oh, America has the greatest healthcare system in the world," and I'm like, "Yeah, they could probably cure, your fifth stage cancer if you're a billionaire."
Right.
You
Right.
know, so I just kind of took that to an extreme. Um, there, I do. I guess that's interesting you brought that up. I do try to avoid stuff that like would help or hinder my characters in the world building. So I guess I never really thought about it in that way, but I guess I would prefer to make sure that all of the world building is true to the world and not necessarily helpful or a hindrance to, the story.
Hmm.
So, you know, I'm not throwing in like teleporters. I mean, not that that's a good example, but I'm not throwing in teleporter just because like, oh, I want to skip over this part of the story or anything like that. So yeah, now that you mention that, I think I really do try and just make sure that everything at least makes sense, or in my mind makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, you brought up the thing about now I cannot claim credit for this. I wish I could. Oh God, I wish I could remember who the philosopher was. But the thing about everyone being, it's called La Raza Cosmica.
Yeah.
The essentially everyone looks Brazilian.
Right.
That's actually a theory, and I've
Hmm.
had people take me to task about that and be like, "Oh, well, that's never going to happen." I'm like, "No, it will."
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, race is a construct, but what we consider races, they're eventually going to all interbreed until everyone looks alike.
Right.
So that was something I was just like, well, 200-300 years from now, yeah, that's probably where we will be.
Right. Yeah. Well, um, that kind of leads us to this one question that I feel like is in every single writer interview that I listen to or watch, where they always
Okay.
ask you, "Are you a planner or are you a pantser?" You kind of talked about the idea of you didn't want to sort of build in things to your story because you don't want to use this like a shortcut. But when you're creating I'm assuming that when you're making a science fiction horror story, that you're eager about creating the world, but that you're also like, well, it has to be scary and it has to be gory. So, like, in general, are you a planner or a pantser, and how does that work when you're making the Matophages?
I am a little bit in between. Um, I was fully a pantser on Brain Eater Jones. That basically, I did no planning on that. That's not true. I did write down the rules of the world. So I at least said Jones needs alcohol. He can't. He has bad memory. So I wrote those down. But the entire story, I just went and saw where it went. Um, but more recently, I've become kind of a blend of the two. So I do like to do very thorough world building. And I actually kind of prefer that. People sometimes ask me, why don't you ever do sequels? Because I kind of prefer that part, like taking a concept and being like, well, what are all the unexpected, consequences of zombies, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I really like to do that part. And then I will often the plot itself, I'll have an idea of where it's going, but basically if the world building's strong enough, I can just be like, well, this is what's going to happen, and these are the things they're going to run into and they're going to have to deal with. So like with hematophages, I had built out that there was a flesh world. There are pirates called skin wrappers. Um, a couple of those points, and I was like, well, okay, now everything that happens in between here and there, like it has to make sense with the world building, and then essentially do pantsing on the plot.
Hmm.
Um, so it's kind of a good combo of both.
Okay. You mentioned the skin wrappers. I know that you have a novella called Skin Wrapper,
Hmm.
and Hematophages was re-released, right, more recently, and then Skin Wrapper was added on the back of it. That was
Yes.
because it was released by an Italian company, right?
Sort of.
Okay.
So the whole story is I wrote the Hematophages. It's a pretty self-contained story. Now I am expanding on the universe, the galaxy, and some other stuff, but the story of the Hematophages is pretty self-contained. And I sold it to this Italian company, Dunwich Edizione, which is like Dunwich Publishing.
Okay.
Um, and they asked me for a short or a novella as a marketing tool. And if they had said short, I would have been like, yeah, sure, here's whatever. But when they gave me that offer of a novella, I was like, now that's interesting. What could I do with a novella?
Sure.
And I was like, well, the story of the Hematophages, I don't want to spoil it, by bringing it out of the book until I do, say, a proper sequel or prequel.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff I can say about skin wrappers. Skin wrappers are a known quantity.
Hmm.
And even the badass Rambo, alien space marines, they're all fucking terrified of the skin wrappers. So I was like, we didn't really find out why in the Hematophage. I kind of did that little cheat where if you make the badass character scared of something, it's a little scarier. And I was like, well, let's find out why they're all actually
Yeah.
scared. So I
Yeah.
wrote that story. It got translated into Italian. So it was actually out in Italian before I released it in English.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then my old publishing company went under. They released the rights back. Talking to my new company, they were just like, it's a re-release. You're not going to make that much money on the novella. We're going to spend more putting a new cover and putting new editing into the novella. So let's just put them both under one cover.
Oh, okay. Oh well, the new cover I think is really cool. I like the cover that I have, which is like the kind of side profile, and it's got
Yeah,
this kind of neat effect. But I really like the eye stalks coming out of the eyes and from the new cover. Yeah.
thanks.
So yeah, man. Yeah. So I mean, I definitely want everyone to go check out that book if they are new to you and they're learning about your work. I want people to go check out Hematophages and let us know what they think about it in the comments. But besides that, I wanted to talk about Clickers Never Die. And so with Clickers Never Die, that's your most recent book that you've published, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then that one is your second collaboration with Wiley Young. The two of you worked on another book, which is called The Perfectly Fine House. Now, that one I have not read. Can you give me kind of a non-spoiler synopsis of that one?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's actually I can do that pretty easily because people pick that up at conventions.
Okay.
Um, so the Perfectly Fine House, it's a reverse haunted house story. And what it is it takes place in a world, an alternate reality, where ghosts are just accepted as normal. So you go to elementary school, you learn about the six senses. Um, you go home, you're looking for a contractor in the telephone book, and amongst them is exorcists. It's a very spiritual, haunting stuff. It's just another part of life. So if you have a poltergeist, go call somebody in the yellow pages, go call an exorcist, get them out here. Then the characters discover this house that's not haunted.
Okay.
And the fact that there are no ghosts and ghosts cannot seem to come near or approach or pass through this house is a very terrifying prospect in the universe.
Oh,
And the reason why I got Wiley involved, I'll take this aside real quick because I think
yeah.
it's kind of interesting. But I had that idea, and when I was trying to workshop it, like myself, workshop's not the right word, but I was just trying to brainstorm it myself.
Right.
I was like, there's two ways to do this. And the bullshit way, the easy way, is to have a bunch of jump scares and have the audience be scared because there's ghosts jumping at them and stuff.
Sure.
And I was like, but the problem is, in a world like that, none of the characters would be scared of a ghost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I could do that, but it's a complete cop out. And
Right.
what I really wanted to do was find a way to make the characters terrified, and then the reader will be sucked in. And I was sitting on the porch smoking a cigar or something with Wiley one day, and I said,
Yeah.
I've got this idea. I cannot workshop. I cannot figure it out. And the hurricane had just gone through Puerto Rico. And he said, well, that's what you do. You have there be an event that's like a catastrophic event that everyone is terrified conceptually that ghosts are going away. And then he just like went off for like 45 minutes and was like, here's how you scare the people inside the book. And I was like, oh my God, let's write it together. You're the idea man on this one, apparently.
That is awesome. And so, is that the very first time you guys ever worked together on anything? Was that novel?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then you guys were friends. I mean, obviously, from that experience, you guys were prior, friends or whatever.
Yep.
But you know, working with him, you've worked on Clickers Never Die, and I know that Brian Keene approached you guys, and he essentially wanted you guys to reboot the franchise, right?
Yeah.
Because he had worked on it with two other writers, with well, I got their names written down. I'm sorry, Jesus Gonzalez and
Yeah.
Mark Williams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I haven't read either of their works before, but I want to read the other Clickers books after reading yours. So my question to you is, when you and Wiley sat down and you're like, okay, we're tasked with rebooting this horror franchise that other authors really look up to and really like, did you make a list of like, okay, we have to include this, we have to have this in the book?
Yes.
Okay.
We did. There were definitely some hallmarks to the Clickers series. So I want to say, first of all, for your audience, like Pete did, you can absolutely pick up Clickers Never Die and have no issue. It's supposed to be a clean reboot. You don't need any knowledge of the past books. But also, if you're a big fan, picking up the 5th book in the series, you'll be satisfied because there's Easter eggs, there's callbacks, there's stuff like that.
Okay.
But we're not leaving any new readers like, well, you had to have read book 2 to get the reference. It's none of that stuff.
Right.
But that being said, there were a bunch of things in the Clickers books. There were even a couple that I forgot about that Wiley was like, oh, you didn't do this part. So like the one thing that springs to mind is before the Clickers come, there's always this wave of sea life that washes up on the shore, with the implication being all the octopi and fish and stuff were so fucking terrified that they would rather beach themselves than endure the Clickers. I had forgotten about that.
Oh, okay.
And Wiley was like, oh yeah, here's that scene. But there was like in Clickers 2, they got very political.
Okay.
There was definitely a lot of stuff with it was the Bush administration at the time.
Right.
And they did a bunch of stuff about the crazy administration. And I was like, it's funny, we're kind of in the middle of a crazy administration right now. So I kind of brought some of that stuff back. But yeah, there were definitely like, we got to do A, we got to do B, we got to do C, or it's not a Clickers book. And we're not doing that like Return of the Living Dead 3 thing where we're like, it's in that universe, but we're taking it in another direction. We're like, no, it needs to be, yeah, absolutely. We had a list of things, yeah.
So, as someone who hasn't read those previous Clickers books, is there something that's in this book without spoiling it that's like, oh, this is our stamp on Clickers?
Well, it was never historical.
Okay.
That was kind of the big thing we introduced. Oh, like another thing that was in all the Clickers books was the news clippings in the beginning.
Yeah.
In the beginning and the end, which we did, it sort of hint, oh, this has been going on in the past and it will be going on in the future and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But basically the first one was either 1999 or 2000 and it was contemporary. And then, like I said, the second one was 2004. So, and it continued to be contemporary. We said, let's assume it's a reboot, so we can do whatever we want. But let's assume Clickers have been around since World War II. And, well, there were nuclear weapons in World War II, so maybe that's why all the evidence has disappeared for 60 years. And we came up with this historical, so to speak, Clickers story.
Yeah. Well, with the two of you guys writing, it's funny because I've read Hematophages, and then I've read this, and then I've read from Wiley. I've read the Magpie Coffin and Dust Bowl Children. Right.
Yeah.
So I try to kind of figure out, okay, this sounds like Steven's writing this part. This sounds like Wiley's writing this part. And I was thinking that for you, just based on like what I see you posted on Twitter and our interactions, that like I was thinking that you brought the humor and that Wiley would bring like the historical stuff. Because I've interviewed Wiley too on this channel and his wife too. And I know that he's like a history guy. I'm guessing that you're a history guy too.
Yeah.
But like, how did it break down as like who wrote what?
That's a fair question, but there's also a lot of overlap. I mean, or I should say that's a fair analysis that you made in your question, but there's also a lot of overlap. So just real quick, in Perfectly Fine House, no one should have any issues with that one. When you pick it up, it's literally chapter 1 is me, chapter 2 is Wiley, and it continues like that. It's literally there's 2 viewpoint characters, and unless you're very, very ignorant to our writing styles, you can probably pick up real quick which is which. With the clickers, with any real like splattery horror, you need a lot more characters. So we said at the beginning, we're going to need like 10, 15 viewpoint characters.
Yeah.
So I was talking about how it's World War II. We also have this kind of this James Cameron-esque, Titanic, like they're finding stuff in the present day
Right.
framing device. So I did all the present day stuff. I did the James Cameron guy. All of that stuff was me. And then in the past, there was a Japanese officer who was a viewpoint character. I did him. And there was a castaway who was a very, very popular character, the character Doodles.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I did Doodles.
Okay.
And all of the just straight up, there were like 4 or 5 Marine Corps, USMC Marine Corps characters, and Wiley did those chapters.
Okay.
So we had a pretty good breakdown. Wiley did the bulk of the writing because most of it is the Marine Corps guys. And you said you read Catfish or no?
I have not read that one, no.
Oh, okay. So, well, then this is not so much a spoiler, but one of the characters from Wiley's Catfish in the Cradle, his great uncle, I think, is the Hoodoo Man in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's cool.
So he did all the Hoodoo stuff.
Uh-huh.
Hoodoo is West Texas, it's Cajun magic.
Right.
And then so he wrote the bulk of the book. He probably wrote 65% of the book.
Oh, wow.
But I did go through and I edited everything hard because I was actually in the service. So he was very good, but there were little things that he would do where I'd be like, I know why you had this Marine character say such and such, but no Marine worth his salt would ever say that. So I was just like, just a little bit of editing on his stuff.
That's really interesting that you bring that up because when we talked last during your Publish Like a Motherfucker session, we were talking about the idea of like mentorship and your mentor, Brian Keene, you mentioned that like he kind of knows that you had the chops, right? And when I was reading Clickers Never Die, that's where I was really getting the idea of those chops. I really love Hematophages too. It's like a different beast. And then when I was reading Clickers Never Die, I was like, man, it's like you really capture the feeling of like a World War II story, and that in itself I felt was like so impressive because it like first of all I wasn't expecting that at all from the book, and then all of a sudden it's like it reads just like something like a World War II story, and then it's also like this crazy fantastic horror. With that being said, like, is there a point that you try to make to because one thing I noticed in one of your interviews too was that at least at the time of the interview that you struggled with description, right? Is there something that you're always aiming for when you're trying to tell a story that's set in space, like Hematophages, or when it's set in World War II? Like because in both books you really capture the feeling? Like, what do you need to put in place for your stories to make them feel real?
Sure.
That was a
So
really fucking convoluted question, by the way.
no. I got it. I got it. So what I was talking about in that other interview, um, I find physical descriptions of characters to be boring as sin.
Okay.
It's not. I don't look at the world that way. I'm not. It's probably just my outlook on life, but like, oh my god, I will see people bicker about like, oh, the little girl in the Hunger Games was a Native American, and this character doesn't look like this actor doesn't look like this character, and I'm like, what the fuck are you people talking about? Who cares? But I get it. There are certain people that are really physical in their thought processes, and they're really worried about like, oh, this character had green eyes, and then in the next scene you said he had blue eyes, and I'm like, who gives a like, honestly. So like, my default, and it was something that my editor on Brain Eater yelled at me about. She was like, you never once describe a shirt, a couch, anything that anybody's wearing, or you're just like, they go to the place and they do the things, and I'm like, that's what's interesting about a book. So I do actively try to do a little bit of description and that sort of thing. And I remember the Hematophage, like, this is the other thing. I'm always asking my girlfriend, like, what's a stiletto? What's a blouse? You know, like, I don't know any of that stuff. So like, in the Hematophages, you'll notice that the the fashion was for them all to wear jumpsuits.
Right,
So it
right,
was
right,
like,
right. Yeah.
they all wore jumpsuits because that was the fashion at the time. Like, it made it
Right.
really easy for me to remember.
Yeah.
So that's what I was talking about with the descriptor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I with sci-fi's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, horror is also tricky, but usually like people are willing to accept, like, even if you yeah, I mean, let's put the World War II thing aside, but if you're doing like a contemporary horror novel, people are like, okay, it takes place on Earth in today. It could happen to me. Science fiction is trickier because I have to bring you into that story. But another problem that I have with some science fiction is where they go really overboard on that.
Yeah.
So what I always come back to when I'm doing the descriptions of stuff is this something that you and I, Pete, would be talking about? So
Okay.
for instance, like, we're both fully aware. In fact, we're probably not really physically aware of it, but like, I'm wearing a headset and I have a web camera, and we have this software on this computer that connects us, and also there's a internal combustion engine down the road that's running the power to our lines, right?
Right. Right. Right.
We've all gotten through a half hour of this interview and never felt the need to comment on any of that.
Yes.
So when I see a science fiction character being like, well, as you know, Bob, we're going to hop into the hyperspace defense machine, which works like this because, and
Right.
I'm like, nobody talks like that, and nobody's worrying about that shit. And the only time that I think about how my car functions is when it breaks
But it
down.
doesn't. Right. Right. Right.
So I make a concerted effort with my sci-fi
Yeah.
to pull back and hint at things. And if I feel like it's something that the audience really has to know, I may make the car breakdown, so to speak, so that the people will look at it. Now, there is one scene in Hematophages that to this day, I'm still very ambivalent about.
Hmm.
Now, you mentioned the cast is all female.
Right.
And that was a deliberate choice from a storytelling perspective. It was a deliberate choice from a world building perspective. And I really wanted to leave it uncommented upon because I wanted people to discuss why is he doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did put in a scene where they were discussing the Hematophages and they were like, oh, look, this species still has males. How funny.
Right.
And
Right.
I was very much of two minds of that, but I was like, honestly, in that reality of that world, they would probably comment upon it. They would probably be like, how funny to see a male in the wild.
Right.
And I regret that a little bit because I'm like it almost, but I've definitely had people say I didn't notice it until that scene that every character was
Oh,
female.
sure, sure.
And then I've had other people that are like, "Oh, I knew from page one," like it's a badge of honor. I don't know, but
Right, right.
yeah,
I feel like those people that are like, I knew it from page one. Those are the people that are like, well, they had green eyes in the last chapter and they had blue eyes. Those kind of people, they're in the same
yes,
camp. And they're those
yes.
people that you mentioned in the other interview where there was someone that wrote a review and they complained about you not describing the hyperdrive on your book. Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
rest assured, guys. I have all the specs for the hyperdrive in my Bible. If it's really important to you,
yeah.
let me know. Tweet me and I will explain it to you. But I didn't feel like any of the characters would care very much about it.
Yeah. I mean that bumbling question that I did before, I think it was just really because I just wanted to give you a compliment. I just really wanted people to check out this book because it's just like it's so good, and there are so many POV characters throughout the story, and like so many of them are really memorable too. And just like the clickers themselves, it's like such a I mean, there's like a mythology to it. And I'm sure that the previous books deal with them as well, like the deal with the mythology. I just really think that people should check out both your books, on Amazon or wherever they can get them.
Thank you.
But I know that because Brian Keene does this introduction at the beginning of the Clickers Never Die book, he mentions how they wanted to have 4 books for this reboot, and they wanted to sort of like mirror the original series of books. Do you know, like, are you and Wiley doing the next one, or is it like going to be different authors every time?
Yes, I know, and no, we are not. Um, we are prepared if called upon. You're gonna think I'm joking, but Wiley has a great clickers versus mecha clickers pitch.
Nice.
And I'm not joking. It is a good pitch, but no, this was explained to us by Brian. Um, you guys are gonna reboot it, then you're gonna walk away. If a movie gets made, you only make residuals on your characters. We're like, oh yeah, that's all gonna happen. But okay.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Um, but I believe I know I think Brian Keene and Brian Smith are doing one. I
Oh,
believe Kenzie Jennings and Jeff Strand are doing one. Now, and that's the other thing. When I was talking before, I wasn't trying to like talk shit on the idea of going off on tangents, but I think they are doing some kind of a romance, like the Lake House or something, that's kind of off on its own. And but then
oh,
they find out clickers have invaded.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm kind of stoked for that one. That's all
yeah.
I really know about that one. And I know Candace Nola
I saw
was
something
gonna
about
be
that.
involved.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
probably shouldn't name all these names because who knows, who's actually been invited and who's going to be upset. But let's just say that's a general idea of the kind of people that I'm expecting to take this baton and run with it.
That is awesome. Okay. Yeah, very cool. I mean, I'm excited. I think I probably will go back and just read the originals first before moving on with the series too. But it's funny, you mentioned a whole bunch of authors just now, and in the book, in Clickers Never Die, there's a whole bunch of author name dropping just as characters too. Like you have like Jay Wilburn, Wes Southard, Lucas Mangum. I always think I'm going to say his name wrong. That's why I said it real weird like that. But
Yeah.
I mean, you have a ton, right? And so I was wondering, I don't know these people personally, but I know that you do, or in some cases, some of them are deceased too. Like when you're writing their names in the book, is it just like, oh, this person's name, I'm going to put it in here, or is it like you're imagining that person as this character?
Uh, both, both.
Okay.
A lot of times, if it's a throwaway, if it is a throwaway character, I'll just be like, okay, it's going to be Wes. Um, I actually just did I think I forget if I mentioned this last week, but I'm working on the Black Magpie versus the Hematophages.
You did mention that. Yes, yes.
So I did a chapter, and it was just this out of left field chapter. That one's a Civil War one, and it was this Union ironclad, and I was just like, none of these characters have been seen before or are going to be seen again. So I just picked every famous British horror author.
Oh.
So it was just like Commander Adam Neville and Captain Matt Shaw and Jack Bantry is the midshipman, like that. So sometimes we'll just do that, and other times I'd never say I'm like inserting that character, but Clickers is a good example, and Jay Wilburn sadly gone too soon. But that's Jay. That was my interpretation of how Jay would talk to me and
Yeah.
talk me down if I was in that case. And Armand Rosamilia and Frank Edler are in that as well as kind of the
Oh.
more uh, not evil, but like a little bit more antagonistic oceanographers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned something about like Rosamilia finally came back from the baseball park with a hot dog or something. I was like, that was just a little, because Armand loves baseball and hot dogs and everything.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. Yeah. I was actually thinking about inviting him onto the Lasser cast at one point. I just a little thing about Jay Wilburn real quick is that I met him at the Ghoulish Book Festival
Oh, okay.
in March, right? And he was really nice, and he was really awesome on this one panel that I saw him on. And then I bought one of his books, and I had a whole bunch of books to go through. And I always get updates of like people I could potentially interview, and so I just kind of put his book on the back burner, and I'm like, oh, I want to get around to interviewing him, and then I found out that he died, and it just really sucked because he seemed like a really cool guy, and he seemed like a lot of horror writers really appreciated him. He did this one thing that I thought was unique, and I wondered if maybe you knew about this or if like you know anyone else that does this. But like he would go on Twitch and like live stream his writing. Like, have you
Mhm.
ever seen him do that or know anyone that does that?
He was the one who was pioneering it.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't think anybody else has picked it up or picked up the baton or anything.
yeah. But he just seemed like a real cool guy, and so I was thinking,
Yeah,
maybe even though I didn't get a chance to interview him, I might still read some of his works and then like interview.
yeah.
You said the guy that co-wrote with him is what was his name again? Uh,
Armand.
Armand. Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah,
maybe I might reach out to him and see if he might want to come on too.
yeah, definitely. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Jay was Mr. Rogers. That's who I compare him to, both in the sense that they were gentle, thoughtful people, but also in the way that society kind of recognized there's not a lot of gentle, thoughtful people, and I think that um, yeah, I don't think Jay would ever believe. I'm kind of getting upset talking about it right now, but
I'm sorry. Yeah.
no, it's not you. I brought it up, I think, but the I think he would be shocked at what a loss losing him really was to the community. Um, but yeah, he was our Fred Rogers.
That's awesome. Yeah. I looked into some of his books on Amazon, and I know that they closed his own personal website where you can order his books. And because I asked about him on Brian Keene's message board, and he mentioned this one book called The Beautiful Darkness, I think.
Mhm.
And that one seems pretty hard to find, but I'm going to try to track that one down eventually. But I know he's got all these like books where he's co-written with other authors too, so I'm going to
Yeah,
just see. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so I mean, that's kind of everything I had. When we bring this up to a close, I usually have the writer kind of plug where people can find you, and if you have something that's coming out soon too, if you want to plug that, you know.
yeah, absolutely. Well, as we discussed earlier, if you can spell it right, you can probably find me. I'm on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those places. You can find me on Twitter. Follow me. I have a business page on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Really, I'm saying it jokingly, but really, if you look up Kazanowski in any of these places, it's probably me. Um, yeah, Clickers Never Die was the last book that I did that came out. Um, I I'm not sure what the next one by me is going to be, but I have started publishing works by others just this past year. So like I did Your Mind by Summer Cannon. That's out now. And the next thing that I know of 100% coming up in March is going to be Illusions of Isolation by Brennan LaFaro. That's going to be
Oh,
coming out. That's a short story collection coming out under my imprint. So that's coming soon.
oh, that is cool. I didn't know like you were like connected to him at all. That's because he's another guy that I want to get on here eventually. I've talked to him, and he has given me copies of like Noose and
Yep.
Slattery Falls. Right? That's
Yep.
am I getting? I always feel like I'm saying the title of Alan Baxter's book because he's got a title that's similar to his, but Slattery Falls is his.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah. He's cool. He's on that Dead Headspace show too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we're not connected. He was. I don't think I ever met him before. He was a cold query, but his work was so good. We picked it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I started Noose a couple of weeks ago, and then I got sidetracked. But the opening of that was freaking great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
Western stuff,
My
just like Wiley, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My acquisitions editor. I didn't think we opened for a 3-day period in September,
Yeah.
and I didn't think we were going to take anything. I just opened just to be, forthright and be like, yeah, if we're a publishing company, we need to open sometimes. My acquisitions editor was like, read this story in Brennan's book, and I was like, well, fuck, we got to sign him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what is the? Can you give us some more details on your imprint then too?
Yeah. It's French press. I think it's frenchpresspub.blogspot.com.
Okay.
Um, we are okay. So, like I said, we did Your Mind by Summer Cannon. That's out now. Audiobook is coming out in January. We're doing the collection from LaFaro, and we are working on a Perfectly Fine anthology.
Oh, cool.
So that was fully kickstarted, more than fully kickstarted.
Yeah.
Um, so we have some invited people. We have Brian Keene, Jeff Strand, Candace Nola, Kaylee Edwards, myself, and Wiley. We're all contributing stories.
Nice.
And then we're going to open up to cold submissions kind of any day now. I really just need to get it up on the website. But yeah, if if you're interested in doing a story in that world I just described about Perfectly Fine House,
Yeah.
write a short, get it ready, polish it. We will be open probably till March, April. I'm gonna leave a nice window for that one. But yeah,
Nice.
we've got to fill out the rest of the anthology. We've only got like 7 stories, 6 or 7 stories. The
Yeah.
rest, yeah, the rest is going to be by cold query. So
That is so cool. Okay. Well, it's interesting that you're talking about like setting something in that world, right? And then you were talking about clickers before. For
hmm
me, I really got into horror around COVID time, right? Because I really liked the horror community and everyone seemed so nice and fun and everything was virtual, right?
yeah,
But before I was like much more of like a comic guy, a fantasy guy, science fiction. And what I'm learning from like looking into your stuff and Brian Keene stuff, and I guess like the idea of like Wiley having Magpie spin-offs and sequels and stuff
yeah,
is that like you guys are like literally making worlds that people can play in and it's horror, and I just think that that's so cool, you know.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, we're definitely crossing all kinds of borders there. Yeah, I was always a sci-fi guy. I was always Star Trek, Star Wars coming up.
Right.
Went to a few sci-fi conventions. They're all fucking assholes. I
Exactly.
fucking hate them.
Exactly.
I will not.
Oh,
Whoa, hey, I was fiddling around.
uh,
Um, yeah, yeah, so that's why I do a lot of the sci-fi horror blending stuff.
yeah.
And yeah, I won't specify anybody who's an asshole, but oh god, I'm so sick of dealing with those people.
Right. I mean, that's the whole thing is that, like, for me, I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, but like the horror people, those are the really cool people. And like the fantasy people I've kind of met, I'm like, I could kind of, give or take with them.
Some of them are jerks too.
Yeah.
I had a real issue with one fantasy writer a couple of years ago.
Yeah. That's for an off-camera kind of discussion.
Yo, no, I'm not going to call her out. No, no.
Oh, her. Okay, gotcha. Cool. Well, I actually had a really great time talking to you. I was really happy to be on your channel for Publish Like a Motherfucker. If people haven't seen that video, they should look you up on YouTube and find that whole series. I am going to check out your other books after this too, but I'm probably going to go through Clickers first.
Awesome.
But yeah, if you ever want to come back on the channel, I would love to talk to you again on here.
Great. Thanks, man.
Awesome. All right. Well, so then, yeah, that's it. And I guess we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.